Wait! I'm a what? Written by Atina Blackcharm. Chapter 18. So check it out. Tim was at the Bat computer talking to Barbara while Jason and Dig were lounging out on the couch that they somehow snuck into the Bat cave a few years ago. Looks like Killer Croc escaped from Arkin in the chaos the other day, Barbara reported, adding his name to the list of people who had escaped on the screen. Tim, meanwhile, had been going through the arrest reports and their own reports from their patrol to cross off the names that had been found already arrested and so on. Actually, Jason took another bite of one of Duke's protein bars that had been poorly hidden. Dude's been out for a while. Barbara sighed and spun her chair to look at him. Why wouldn't you tell us? Jason shrugged. I ain't a snitch. Well, in school. Dude, Dick nudged Jason with his foot, which was promptly smacked away. He literally dislocated Bruce's shoulder the last time they fought. Yeah, Jason smiled. I know. And you can type that I said that in the report. Timmy, see, I can be cooperative. You and I have very different definition of that word. Tim typed away at his computer, ignoring how Jason yelled that he had probably read more books than Tim had in his life. That's 'cause you're a nerd. So are you. Everyone here is some sort of nerd, Barbara retorted. Now focus. I have another name. Fine. But we still need to go over the report from what he heard from the kids. At that, Jason scowled. Everyone knew that most of the kids had been from Crime Alley, and there was no question that Jason had been pissed when he found out about it. It helped that he'd been the one to find them. He didn't mention the gut feeling when asked and avoided Tim's eyes. All that mattered was that the kids were fine. How Jason found them was a small detail. The kids had been relatively well, if not hungry and dirty. A few bruises and cuts, but nothing that was life-threatening. It had been pure luck that they made it so far from where they were being held without running into trouble. The kid leading them, Zipper, said it was no mystery to them. When Jason asked him why, Zipper just shrugged, staying close to the older girl, who just kept staring at him warily. He promised, was all that Zipper replied. The other kids had different reasons, but what was most perplexing was their answers about how they escaped. The description of the lights going out, utter darkness and something glowing, looking, a voice they could not understand. It sounded like shit from a horror movie. The only ones unfazed had been Zipper and the girl, Snaps, when she finally gave a name. The kids said that the two called this thing Bright Eyes, and at one point called it Boss, but the two didn't elaborate when questioned. Zipper just smiled, knowingly, while Snaps kept her mouth shut and crossed her arms. The two didn't utter a word, and when the cops finally showed up, with Black Bat in tow, all the kids were being accounted for. Zipper and Snaps disappeared. Jason couldn't say when exactly they slipped away or how. Even when he asked Jess, she gave him a look that already told him she'd have no answer for him. No surprise there. It left another question to add to the list of shit to think about for that night. That, along with the appearance of Grunty at the warehouses, carrying what Red Robin reported as a dead body. Pale with no signs of life, too cold. What Grunty said, with bullet holes in his clothes, painted a very bleak picture. One of their working theories was that Grunty made a friend with a teen who ended up kidnapped like the others. Then, while all the other kids managed to escape, one of them was killed during the gunfight, or possibly was dead long before, considering the state they were in when Grunty came out. Maybe they'd get some information that corroborated that theory once the police interrogated the unconscious goons and took more witness statements from the kids. Anything about the court? Someone asked, and the others got tense. Earlier, when Batman visited the Joker, they were able to hear the singing through the comms, his disgusting, mocking, folk sweet voice, cooing a warning about the court. Dick looked particularly grave at the notion. It could have been a joke, something to fuck with their heads, except Black Mask had been revived. Tim sighed with a frown. Results came back, and you're not gonna like it, but there were traces of electrum. There wasn't supposed to be any left. The cord was supposed to have been handled, and yet the choker, for some reason, was bringing them back. He could, of course, just be fucking with them. Still, he had brought Black Mask back. Just exactly how did he get his hands on electrium? And what was his connection to the court? Then he hadn't dreamed in a very long time. Nocturne in particular was very bothered by that fact. It was hard to sleep when you wandered in the infinity. Time was like water in the realms, barely noticeable, like air, frozen like ice, chaotic like a hurricane, calm as a placid lake. Danny had waded through those waters for he doesn't know how long. He found new places and long forgotten ones. That was until Clockwork plucked him out and dropped him in Gotham. Now he dreamed of shadows, screams, and cold eyes, but also of warmth, stars, and laughter. It made his core thrum inside, and his lung filled with air. Reality was creeping into the dream, drifts of rumbles and rushing of water. A strong body held him, while a warmth enveloped him. Beneath him was a rumble, a hum that only reached out to smooth and protect. Grunty. When he opened his eyes, it was almost pitch black, but he didn't need the light to see. He was back on the ground in the sanctuary of Grunty, where the water fell off into the abyss. Its rushing sound was ever consistent. Gotham was silent and calm, her shadows moving once more, with no ripples from unseen threats she tried to face alone. Instinctively, Danny knew his own little shadows were back, safe home. It was okay to rest. Grunty had his eyes closed, but there was still the rhythm of his aura and rhyme, a part of him as much as it could be. It didn't falter or something in this deep underground belly. Alongside was the heavy breathing of another, and he looked to the side, content to see scaled skin resting against cool stone. Raylan was asleep, and at peace with a blanket of his own. He showed no signs of wounds or pain, much to Danny's relief. They were safe and secure. Their auras were calm and content, friendly, when he brushed against them with his own, though urging him to sleep once again. He could rest in the underground, the two of them said, without words. Topside could wait. Have you guys seen Bright Eyes? That was the question that popped up. News of what happened to Zipper and Snaps spread around easily. They had heard from Zipper and Snaps what happened. Danny had showed up and found them, told them to get others away safe, and they did. Not even a suspicious parked car was in their way when they left the warehouse district. It was off, but they didn't dislike it when it happened. Danny had been silent, his eyes aglow. He had been angry, but a different angry, encompassed in darkness. The sharpness of his nails was never like that before. There was the flash of teeth in the dark. It was morbid. Still, they weren't afraid of Danny. They had been so relieved when he appeared, even if he looked different. It was probably because he was a meta. Emotions fucked them up and made them look different. Everyone knew it could happen. Zipper thought they looked kind of cool, but they got home fine. Mullan checked on them before sending them to rest. They got home safe, but that was a while ago, and since then, no one had seen a tail or hide of Danny. They listened to the news about the attacks and the Joker being beaten by Batman again. They went on with their day, but kept an eye out for more trouble. Though none came, they waited for Danny to come back. They hadn't seen Grundy or Valen either. Most likely they were with Danny. Those days were quiet. No one tried anything big, and just waited. They were used to waiting. Usually it was for something bad, but it didn't feel like that this time. Something finally happened a couple of days later, in the early morning, around 3 a.m., that someone reported they saw Grundy lumbering down the sidewalk with Danny in his arms. It was unusual to see Danny so still, and he had always been on the move. No one got in Grundy's way when he walked. They didn't even really question why Grundy carried him. They just watched as he walked down the street, so oddly silent. Grundy didn't look good either. The two of them looked like they had gone through the ringer. Grundy's clothes were torn, and there were bullet holes. Danny was utterly limp and looked pale. He usually was, but it was different this time. He was usually smiling and holding out a sandwich or a blanket. He was usually waving high and warning them about a drop in temperature or that the police were making rounds. Grundy carried Danny into the observatory. When he came out, his arms were empty, and he sat at the entrance. Joe ended up standing in front of Grundy until Grundy grumbled, and Joe nodded before gesturing for Martin, who was coming down the street, come with him inside. Finally, they got to see Danny. He was in his room with one of Miss Junie's blankets covering him. His plant, Josephine, was by the window, somehow still growing. The room was quiet, and Danny's chest barely moved. A few footsteps came up from behind them. "Should we call someone? Do you think he's sick?" one of the kids whispered, once they peeked their head into the room. There was a light buzz that made their hair stand up, a slight ringing in their ears. "No," Martian said. "Let him rest." The buzz settled down, and the ringing disappeared. The neighborhood was still relatively quiet for a while. They watched the shadows and didn't stray far from the center. Every day they checked on Danny, but he didn't move and didn't wake. Snaps told them that Metafolk don't always heal like they do, and really, Danny won't be any different. No one could say anything different. It was odd without Danny's visits. He was always there, popping up. It felt off. Something was missing. They wanted to ask so many questions. Where did he come from? Why did he stay? Did he know those things the others kept seeing? The glints of gold in the corner of their eyes? The sound of hooves on the road at night? Zipper swore they saw someone standing guard outside Danny's room. Who was that? Did he know? Though with Danny's forgetfulness of actually explaining things, they didn't expect an outright answer. Still, it was a relief when Jimmy ran out of the observatory one afternoon with a wide smile, yelling, "He's awake!" Danny opened his eyes and felt alive again. There was a tired ache and some minor pain in his head, but his heart beat strongly, and things didn't feel cold or muddied. He could smell dust and feel the warmth of a ray of the sun. He could hear the chattering downstairs and distant sounds of Gotham. Gotham herself was alive, beeping horns and fast-paced feet walking on the ground, the jingling of keys and the yell of someone for a taxi. She was alive as ever, and also thrilled with him. Apparently he had been asleep for a while, since that night in the warehouse and in the underground, and she had been waiting. It wasn't hard to find out that Grundy had taken him home, back to the observatory. Everyone else was fine. The children were fine, though they were coated in worry and concern, curiosity. It wasn't long after waking up that he had been scolded by Sandra again, and given a meal in a container. "Here, you can't be going so long without eating. Do you know how bad it can get?" Her words were filled with concern, and Danny appreciated them, and could not deny the truth behind them. But his eyes were drawn to the little blob ghost milling around her head. It bobbed along to the cadence of her words, warbling and furling at her exclamations. No one else could see it. Hey, attention, or I will get LJ. Sorry, Sandra, Danny replied reflexively, with his eyes focusing again on her face. Sandra crossed her arms and sighed. Honestly, just how do you forget to take care of yourself? I have other things to do, you know. At this the blob ghost lowered itself onto Sandra's head as she seemed to slump on herself with a slight muttering under her breath. He didn't hear it, seeing as he was a bit more interested in all the blob ghosts he could sense around. After Sandra left, then he made his way outside. A part of him ached at the sight before him. Something had shifted in the neighborhood. Walking down the stairs, the walls had undeniably settled in a sense, though Danny had a feeling they'd give in to him with a simple touch. But what was most interesting were all the little blob ghosts milling around in the street, hovering over the shoulders of whoever lived there. They floated underneath Martin's bench and went up the fire escape where surely Tick or Tack were. It reminded him of Amity. A few even followed Eric as the boy came up to him and began to drag him off. A few hours later, the little creatures happily tripped along for the ride. Blob ghosts reminded were like fish, with how they bobbed along in the air or made little spins. They usually had a place where they liked to linger, or a particular ghost. Frostbite almost had an army of blob ghosts who took residence in the far frozen, and were rather fond of the yiddies. They were surprisingly cuddly with Danny too, and when he asked why, Frostbite simply laughed.
Danny, take a bite, or so help me God, I will get old man LJ to throw grapes at you.
Sandra threatened again, and reflexively Danny finally took a bite of the chicken curry Victoria made. The spice woke him up even more. He realized he was in Eric's and Sandra's apartment. The three of them were at the table. Apparently Eric was given orders to drag him there. He couldn't remember when. You good, boss? Eric asked, spoon halfway in his mouth. Then he nodded and missed away Sandra, and Eric shared a look. One of the little blob ghosts came around to him, in the crevice of Danny's neck and shoulder. He simply smiled and took another bite. Thank you for the food. The blob ghosts were good. They were part of a healthy haunt, and it was refreshing to see them after not seeing a single one in Gotham since he first arrived. Gotham seemed pleased with them too. Her shadows reached out to poke at them, lingering at his shoulders, where a few of the blob ghosts were, while he walked towards the cemetery after leaving Sandra's apartment. He waved and nodded at others he passed by, but no one came up to him. It felt fine, and they didn't look unhappy. More of them came out as the sun set. It was moving to see, and then he felt the tension slowly leave him over the next few days. Visiting the others, especially his little shadows, helped, but it didn't fully put him at ease. He would have forgotten to eat a few times if it wasn't for Eric snitching on him to Sandra. After he poked Danny in the side and looked at him concerned. Danny was fine. He kept telling himself that, even though the spot underneath the broken angel looked much more inviting than usual. A few of the blob ghosts floated by, sending out small chirps and trying to pass through him, sending small pulses of tired, rest, comfy, hidden, rest, safe to him. When one of them kept bumping into his nose, he finally sighed in resignation. Yeah, I'm going. Then slowly, he let go of his grip, and his body shifted. It was like stretching out a sore muscle this time, and then he couldn't help but groan slightly in pain at the change. Not that he'd admit it. He was fine, though he didn't hesitate to pull himself into the nook under the angel. The coldness of the granite and the shadows were smooth against his skin, and the bones jutting out from his chest. His hair grew until it touched the ground, and then even more. A few blob ghosts tried to nestle underneath the dark strains. It looked like they were trying to hide in the night sky. He flexed his hands, letting the claws grow until he scratched lightly at the granite, though not deep enough to leave a mark. He simply reached down over the edge until he touched dirt and let them sink into the earth. Gotham hummed. She was the distant rumbling of feet traveling home, and the quiet rustling in a home that was close to sleep. Her shadows reached over the angel and dropped down, providing even more cooling darkness. Then he wasn't sure how much later it was until a few of the shadows reacted at the chirp-chop of a horse. "Art thou in good health, my league?" Then he stretched and opened an eye, catching sight of Fright Knight dismounting his horse, Nightmare. His purple flames were flickering anxiously, while Nightmare was intrigued by the shadows curling around his hooves. It was an amusing sight. "My league?" Fright Knight asked. At the question, he was reminded of that night when everything happened. The cut that Zipper got was particularly healed, and while they waved away Danny's concern, he could tell that when they got cut, they were scared, that they had been taken, afraid, and were hurt. Snaps wouldn't talk about it, but she stopped by more often with more updates on things going around Gotham. She didn't call him weirdo as much as she did before. Grunty had been hurt. Worry, danger, where, hide, where, danger, worry, hide. A blob ghost had snuck its way underneath his chest, with a whispery question cool. Fright Knight was still, but one of his hands was on the hilt of his sword. Then he sighed, and said assurance to the blob ghost. They were safe. There was no danger. He curled himself closer around the blob. There was an incident, then he finally said, which was an understatement, but it was hard to put into words what had happened, to acknowledge that one of his own was taken and hurt, and it was... "Shall I make them pay?" Fright Knight asked, already ready to shoot off into the night and purge a mere mortal into the nightmare realm. They would have no hope of escaping even past death. It was a tempting offer, but Gotham was silent and watching. She was quiet but waiting, like those who hid in the alleys, and went quiet when people walked by. Those who waited with bated breaths to see if the officer driving by would stop, if the sound of metal siren or alarm meant more. He only had a taste of the pain Gotham suffered. It was antagonizing, and then he leaned his head forward to touch the granite. He let Gotham's shadows curl towards his face. Silent whispers in the night, scrambling hands in the dark, people hurtling close, smoke and cinder, a rare, clear sky. Gotham had slowly changed. He knew that before. He would have been unable to release her rage on the bomb. She would have been unable to ensure the safety of those children as they left. She was getting stronger. She had more than enough rage and grief, as did he. She was still waiting. "No," Danny answered, lifting his head, though the shadow simply curled under his chin to around his neck and shoulders. Fright Knight eyed them hesitantly, his flames flickering unceasingly. "The Lady Shadows, my league." Then he smiled. Fright Knight was all about propriety, insisting on rules from long ago, but was as strong as ever. "She is a dear friend, and I will not refuse the comfort." Fright Knight paused, and quickly bowed his head. "Forgive me, I dare not deprive my league of comforts, though deserves what he deserves. Did he deserve this?" Shadows curled along his cheek and brushed back the hair that had fallen in front of his face. Gotham was the sound of an old radio station playing as a mother hummed along, the sound of crickling bags of food being brought home for dinner, and the sigh of relief of someone coming home. With a soft smile, he leaned into it, while Fright Knight stood guard. In a seedy part of town, there's a bar with an almost broken door. It was slammed shut loudly by all the patrons, especially in the rain. It was quiet before there were yells and the sort. But in the corner there was a boom of laughter, jolly but raspy. March's Mullan was an old fella. A Jersey accent was heavy on his tongue, and yet he took to Gotham like he was born there. Some said bad luck followed Matches around, and others thought he was the luckiest bastard around. Although that wasn't saying much, people in Gotham had an old way with luck, especially those who liked to frequent places like these. So all in all, Matches fit right in. Either way, the guy was back in town, and no one could resist catching the man up on what shit had been going around town. Oi, Mullan, you will never guess what happened to that ass Dawson. At the name of a man he got in the fight with last time he was there, Match lifted an eyebrow behind his tinted glasses, and his mouth twisted to his unusual smile. His own shit mask got the best of him, was writhing about glowing eyes and some sort of monster, if you can believe it. Only monster is that damn bat, someone yelled across the bar, and soon it devolved into a contest of yelling names, and so on. Meanwhile, Matches just sipped his drink and twiddled with the unlit match between his fingers. The man next to him, an older feller, muttered, "Pretty sure Dawson's are Bright Eyes." "Funny name," Match responded, and the man just nodded. "New character?" The man looked to his side and took Mullan in before smiling, grabbing a nearby empty beer bottle he had been nursing for the last 20 minutes. "Don't think so. I got a bud, a real quiet guy. This brother's been going to him. Lucky guy." He laughed and downed the rest of his drink. "Shit luck, if I'd say. But it's funny. He likes his Bright Eyes. Protective of him. Like anyone's actually been protective of a boss instead of covering their ass. Must be a nice boss." The man shrugged. "Maybe." Hours later, Bruce walked into the cave and slowly peeled off the fake mustache from his upper lip and ran his fingers through his hair. "How was Matches Mullan's great return?" Tim asked from his spot leaning against the table. "Enlightening," Bruce said, as he gladly shed the coat that had liquor spilled on it earlier. Tim snorted. "All right, B. Let me know what you found out." He took the coat and put it aside before coming with a towel and comfy clothes. "Now go shower, you stink." Bruce smiled and reached over to ruffle Tim's hair, while he dodged with a disgruntled face. "Shower!" He pointed to the side. Bruce held up his hand in surrender, but Tim rightfully glared at him until he walked over to where the showers were. Within 7 minutes, he was coming back, drying his hair in a sweatshirt set, notably a Wonder Woman shirt. "Dude, you know you can take a longer shower. Not like you have to worry about the water bill." Tim raised an eyebrow. "I have to give you my report." Stop being so—" Tim waved a hand around erratically. "Honestly, pamper yourself like the rich bastard you are." Then he turned around and went back to the bed computer, his silence clearly waiting for the report. Bruce couldn't help but lean down and kiss the top of Tim's head. "Thank you for caring." Tim grumbled, and Bruce chuckled before he began his report. There was to go over that Tim efficiently organized into different lists that they look into later, but the goal this time was to get as much information to the new name, Bright Eyes. "That's the name the kids mentioned from the later Joker incident. New player rogue?" Tim asked. "He was referred to as a boss," Bruce said. "The kids we interviewed sounded fond of them, from the little they said." while the adults at the bar were a bit more cautious, especially those who were close to Dawson. Interesting. Maybe Chaser knows something about it. Probably. Tim looked up from the screen and stared at Bruce. Then he laughed. Are you still butthurt that he didn't tell you about Croc? It was important information. Yeah, so was the fact that Gotham is actually cursed, which you failed to tell us. So really, this is just karma coming to bite you in the ass. Bruce sighed. Tim smiled when the man had nothing to say back to that. And that was the chapter. I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you like my videos in general, feel free to subscribe. The last part of the story where it's just Tim and Bruce is I feel like for me Tim is acting a bit out of character here because he grew up in a rich family and Bruce is from a rich family, so I don't know why exactly he would complain about how long Bruce showers. It's just a little inconsistency. There was also just grammar probably inconsistencies in the last part, but otherwise, yeah. I just wanted to point it out. Go check out the story yourself if you want to hear the cool little tidbits that they always like to leave in their notes, because I don't do notes. At least not other notes on this channel. So, this was a green. Enjoy the rest of your time, and see you next time.